I sat in the dimly lit hotel room, my fingers tracing the outline of my wedding ring on the nightstand. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed my life over the past few months. Then, like a bolt of lightning, my phone erupted with a shrill ring. Debbie's name flashed across the screen, and I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. "Hello," I answered, my voice steady and detached. The moment I spoke, Debbie's fury exploded through the phone. "How dare you, Bill? How fucking dare you leave without a word? You abandoned me and the kids, you coward." I held the phone away from my ear, her rage washing over me like a tepid wave. When she paused to catch her breath, I brought the phone back. "I left a note, Debbie. It's on the kitchen counter." "Got a note?" "A goddamn note," she spat. 15 years of marriage, and all I get is a piece of car your ring." I leaned back in the cheap hotel chair, my free hand running through my graying hair. "What did you expect, Debbie? A farewell party?" The indignant gasp crackled through the speaker. I expected my husband to have the balls to face me, not sneak out like a thief in the night. "Right," I muttered, my eyes fixed on the ugly floral wallpaper. "Because you've been so forthcoming lately." There was a pause, and I could almost see her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "How's Doug doing? You two still friends?" The silence that followed was deafening. When Debbie spoke again, her voice had lost its edge, replaced by a defensive tremor. "Doug? What does he have to do with anything?" "I'm just asking about your friend, Debbie. Isn't that what husbands do?" "You're being ridiculous," she scoffed, but I caught the hint of panic in her voice. "Doug is just a colleague. We work together, that's all." I closed my eyes, letting the lie was over me. I'd known about the affair for weeks, had tracked her movements, read her emails, but hearing her deny it so vehemently, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "Right," I said, my voice flat. "Just colleagues." "You're crazy if you think I'm cheating on you, Bill," Debbie hissed. "Is that why you left? Because of some paranoid delusion?" I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch between us. I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow, on the other end of the line. She said, her voice softer now, "Are you there?" "I'm here," I replied, my tone neutral. There was a long pause, and when Debbie spoke again, her voice had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. I feel so alone, Bill. Even when you're there, you're not really there." I remained silent, letting her continue. "Dress up, I try to look good, and you don't even notice. Other men look at me, they make me feel desirable. Is it so wrong to want that?" My free hand clenched into a fist. "And Doug, does he make you feel desirable, Debbie?" She ignored the question, plowing ahead. "I'm not invisible, Bill. I'm a woman. I have needs. Emotional needs. When was the last time we really talked? Really connected?" I felt a twinge of something, guilt, regret, but I pushed it down. "I'm sorry," I said softly, and I meant it. And not for my part in our failing marriage, but for everything she'd already done, everything she was still hiding. "Bill," Debbie's voice was pleading now, "come home. We can talk about this, work it out. Please." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years pressing down on me. "No, Debbie, I can't come home. Not now." "But we need time apart." I cut her off, my voice firm but not unkind. "Space to figure things out." "Space?" she echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. "Is that what you call abandoning your family? Leaving your ring behind like some dramatic gesture?" But I didn't rise to the bait. "It's not abandonment, Debbie. It's necessary." "Necessary?" She scoffed. "What about the kids, Bill? What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them the truth," I replied, my voice steady. "That Dad needed some time to think." "To think?" Debbie's voice rose again. "While I'm left to pick up the pieces. That's not fair, Bill. You can't just walk away from your responsibilities." So I felt a flicker of irritation, but I tamped it down. "I'm not walking away from anything, Debbie. I'm taking a step back to evaluate our situation." "To our situation?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call our marriage now?" I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch between us once more. "Fine," Debbie finally said, her voice cold. "Stay at your hotel, or wherever you are. But don't think for a second that this solves anything. You're running away, Bill. And when you finally decide to come back, don't expect things to be the same." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I know, Debbie, I know things won't be the same. That's kind of the point." She made a sound, half sob, half laugh. You're unbelievable, you know that. Cold as ice. I don't even know who you are anymore. Maybe that's the problem, I said quietly. Maybe we don't know each other at all. There was a long pause, and when Debbie spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. So that's it. You're just done. I closed my eyes, feeling the finality of the moment settle over me. I think we both know it's been over for a while, Debbie. This is just making it official. She didn't respond, but I could hear her uneven breathing on the other end of the line. Goodbye, Debbie, I said softly, and then I ended the call. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the stack of case files before me. Days had passed since that fateful phone call with Debbie, and I'd thrown myself into work, desperate for any distraction from the turmoil of my personal life. The courthouse buzzed with activity around me, a constant reminder of the human tragedies I dealt with daily. As the clock struck noon, I decided to take a break. Not for lunch, though. I had more pressing matters to attend to. I left the office, my mind set on one goal, confirming my suspicions about Debbie. The drive to our family home felt surreal. I knew she wouldn't be there. Her schedule was etched into my brain after years of marriage. As I pulled into the driveway, a wave of nostalgia hit me. How many times had I come home to find her waiting, a smile on her face? Those days were long gone. I let myself in, the house eerily quiet. A computer sat to Saisk in our shared office, innocuous yet holding the potential to shatter what remained of our marriage. I hesitated for a moment before sitting down and logging in. Her password hadn't changed our anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on me. The email app opened, and I began my search. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. An exchange between Debbie and Lance, her young colleague, filled the screen. My stomach churned as I read through their messages, but I felt oddly detached, as if I were reading about strangers instead of my own wife. Their words left no room for doubt. This wasn't just Debbie confiding in a friend or seeking comfort. She was planning a future with Lance, discussing their dreams and aspirations together. The intimacy in their exchanges was palpable, a stark contrast to the cold formality that had settled between Debbie and me. So I scrolled through email after email, each one another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Yet I felt no anger, no rage. Just a dull ache in my chest, a hollow feeling where love used to reside. The marriage had been rotting for years, and now I held the proof in my hands. With methodical precision, I erased all traces of my presence on her computer. No confrontation, no dramatic scene. That wasn't my style. Instead, I closed the laptop and left the house exactly as I'd found it, my mind already formulating a more calculated approach. Back at the office, I immersed myself in work once again. But now there was a shift in my perspective. I was no longer fighting for a relationship that had long since died. Instead, I was quietly distancing myself, preparing for the inevitable end. As I reviewed case files and prepared for upcoming trials, I found myself drawing parallels between the cold, hard facts of law and the stark reality of my personal life. In both realms, emotions clouded judgment. It was better to approach things logically, methodically. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into a new routine. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the intricacies of legal arguments and courtroom strategies. At home, I was a ghost, barely interacting with Debbie when our paths crossed. She noticed the change, of course. How could she not? But any attempts at conversation were met with polite indifference on my part. I was no longer invested in salvaging what we once had. Instead, I was biding my time, waiting for the right moment to make my exit final. The emotional numbness that had settled over me was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed me to function, to carry on with my daily life without breaking down. But it also served as a constant reminder of how far we'd fallen, how the passion and love that once defined our relationship had been reduced to this cold, empty shell. As I sat in my office late one evening, poring over documents for an upcoming case, I realized that this detachment wasn't just about Debbie's betrayal. It was a culmination of years of growing apart, of prioritizing careers over connection, of letting the spark die out without bothering to rekindle it. In a way, discovering Debbie's affair had simply confirmed what I'd known deep down for a long time. Our marriage was over. Now it was just a matter of going through the motions, of untangling the web of shared lives and shared possessions we'd woven over the years. Thought I guess it was inevitable, really. The moment I logged into her laptop all those weeks ago, the moment I saw the messages she probably thought she'd buried. From then on, Everything had been a waiting game, me playing the part of the patient man, biding my time, keeping up appearances at work while the anger simmered underneath. Time had this weird way of stretching and condensing at the same time. Days felt like hours, but each moment alone with Debbie in the house felt like it dragged in eternity. Every time she walked by with that casual indifference, every time her phone dinged, and she quickly flipped it down onto the table, it was like she couldn't be bothered to hide her disgust anymore. For some reason, though, the final dagger tonight didn't unfold quickly. Her lying about tonight's function pissed me off, sure, but that wasn't it. See, Debbie's been telling me for weeks about her boring university events. Some dumb awards ceremony for faculty tonight. I'd be an idiot to believe that excuse. She didn't just underplay it once or twice either. She kept repeating that work description every chance she got, like she needed to convince herself too. So I could have ignored it. Could have kept sitting through one more night in the hotel, shoved another forkful of bland, overpriced room service in my face, and pretended I gave a shit about any of the mindless cable shows I flipped on. Instead, I texted an old buddy of mine who owed me a favor. Used to work campus security for the event hall where this faculty thing was happening. It didn't take much. A name on a list, a few strings pulled, and suddenly I was inside that sterile, overly lit ballroom along with every well-dressed academic and their spouses. It was finding her that took the longest, but once I did, well, it didn't take a genius to see what was really going on. She wasn't awkward or bored or half asleep trying to escape early like she let on the last time we talked. Nope. Debbie, in her fire engine red dress, one I don't remember ever seeing her wear, for a single goddamn boring work function I'd been dragged to, was planted right at the center, surrounded by the kind of folks she only hangs with when she's seeking attention. And Lance, goddamn Lance, his hand was snug on Debbie's back, laughing loud enough you could hear him from across the room, like some obnoxious kid. I hung back in the shadows, trying to get a read, but there wasn't really much to read. It wasn't subtle. Debbie leaned into him, completely abandoning any shred of self-consciousness she might have had. And the two of them, it's not like I wanted to watch, but there's this weird once you see it, once it's in front of you, you can't stop. I couldn't stop. Not while their arms wrapped around each other like that. Not while their heads tipped back together, laughter intertwining before the inevitable kiss came. The room didn't even seem to notice for the most part, besides a couple of raised eyebrows. It was like the entire thing was so commonplace, so normalized, that nobody cared. Except me. Ah. My hands clenched. I could feel my pulse tightening my entire body, heartbeat throbbing along the base of my skull. But I didn't storm in like some lunatic kicking over tables. There was no grand entrance. No outburst. No screaming how could you, like some idiotic TV drama. I just straightened the collar of my shirt, exhaled, and calmly stepped out of the shadows with purpose. So I found them mid-dance, laughing and swaying lightly to some slow song the band had started playing. That was the moment I locked eyes with Debbie. The look of surprise twisted only halfway across her face before it shifted rapidly to something nastier, like she was scrambling to figure out how the hell I'd even gotten there in the first place. Lance, I said, stepping in right next to them, my voice almost polite. I slipped my hands into my pockets. Congratulations on the award tonight, I threw a nod at Debbie. And well for screwing my wife. Silence. Lance stuttered like a marble had gotten caught in his throat. Debbie's face, on the other hand, went from shock to pure fury. Bill, you don't need to. Oh, I do. Not letting her finish. No, I wasn't giving her control here. Not anymore. I straightened up even taller, gesturing to the small crowd who had started to notice this little scene playing out at the center of the room. Vulture onlookers. Everyone's been waiting for a real show tonight, haven't they? The room had fallen quiet, the band still playing their meandering background music, oblivious to the tension popping like static around us. Debbie's voice came sharp and filled with anger, not embarrassment. She stepped closer to me like she thought she might still be able to scare me off. You're making a scene, Bill. Can't you see that? So who's making the scene? My voice stayed cool, collected. I let it sit in the space between us like an anchor. I'm watching two assholes pretend this isn't exactly what it looks like. I think this scene's been playing for a while, hasn't it? I turned slightly toward Lance, who was, at this point, wearing the kind of blank expression found only on men who definitely knew they were fucked, but had yet to grasp just how badly. He muttered something about this being not the place or some other bullshit excuse, as if we were going to take this conversation to a private office like professionals. Debbie whipped around and took another stab at calming the hurricane that was ramping up. You're embarrassing yourself. Do you understand that? You're not solving anything. This isn't a... I cut her off again, abandoning the verbal sparring. It wasn't going anywhere. Shut up was all I managed, but my voice was low, cold. Lance said something next about Debbie, about how this doesn't change anything. Some idiotic white knight garbage. My body moved before my mind even really caught up. The punch I threw wasn't planned. Hell, I'm not even sure if I meant to connect. But Lance saw it coming. He ducked, fast, like he'd had this dance before. He swung back in a flash, right fist catching me square in the side of the jaw. The floor barreled up at me, fast and brutal. White noise in my ears. Blank spots in my vision. But that rage, man. That spilled over, boiling violently under every inch of bruised skin. Pure adrenaline ripped me off the ground, and I swung wildly again, useless, pathetic. Lance sidestepped my efforts with a grin that soured instantly. He didn't hesitate. He rounded on me. A sharp hit to my ribs doubling me over, then another blow knocked me hard onto the tiles. Laughter from somewhere in the crowd, but it wasn't directed at me. It was just background noise. The physical pain didn't matter. It barely registered. The humiliation, though, yeah, that landed real clean. I lay there for a beat too long, breath snagged somewhere between my lungs and the acid crawling up my throat. I could see through hazy vision Debbie rushing to kneel beside Lance, her fingers brushing his chin, scolding him for reacting with violence, and then shifting to plead with me. Not for my well-being, though. My well-being was irrelevant in that breath. Or hell, maybe it always had been. Bill. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't out of care, it was desperation. And not for me. Just Jesus, can you stop this already? Her eyes were wild, darting between the crowd and Lance, but she couldn't even bring herself to look at me properly. Not really. One glance thrown my way that barely grazed my face before she turned back to Lance, like he was the wounded party. Like he was the one worth calming down, protecting in this mess she'd helped create. She wasn't pleading to save us. No, she was embarrassed. Embarrassed by the reality now on display in front of every single one of those people that she so delicately tried to manipulate. I wasn't part of that image anymore. No, I was an anchor weighing her down. And the realization that her loyalties truly weren't with me hadn't been for months, maybe years even. It was like the last piece of a rotten puzzle snapping into place. I stood there with my split lip, watching as Debbie fussed over Lance. The sight of her hands on him, checking his injuries, made my stomach churn. But I pushed that feeling down, replacing it with cold determination. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The commotion had drawn a crowd, including the university president, Dr. Jameson. He approached us, his face a mask of concern and barely concealed panic. Gentlemen, please. This is highly inappropriate behavior for a university function. I must insist that we take this somewhere private to discuss. I cut him off, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. There's nothing to discuss. Dr. Jameson, what you're witnessing is the public exposure of an affair between two of your faculty members, for one of whom happens to be my wife. Debbie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. Bill, please, don't do this. I ignored her, focusing on Dr. Jameson. I'm sure you understand the implications this could have for your university's reputation. Adultery, workplace misconduct, it's quite a scandal. Dr. Jameson paled, his eyes darting between Debbie, Lance, and me. Mr. Matland, I assure you, we take these matters very seriously. Perhaps we could. I'm not interested in your internal procedures, I interrupted again. I'm considering legal action. The allegation of affection is still recognized in this state. I wonder how the Board of Trustees would react to such a lawsuit. Lance, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. You can't be serious, that's entirely within my rights, I finished for him. As a prosecutor, I'm quite familiar with the law. The crowd around us had grown, and I could hear the whispers. Good. Let them talk. Let the rumors spread. It was all part of the plan forming in my mind. Dr. Jameson stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mr. Matland, please, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement. Raised an eyebrow. Oh, what kind of arrangement did you have in mind? So as Dr. Jameson stammered through a response, I watched Debbie. Her face was a mix of emotions, fear, anger, and something else. Betrayal, maybe? The irony wasn't lost on me. Bill, she hissed, stepping away from Lance. Can we please talk about this in private? I shook my head. No, Debbie, I think we've had enough private conversations. It's time for everything to be out in the open, don't you think? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Good. Let her feel a fraction of the pain I'd been carrying. Turned back to Dr. Jameson. Here's what's going to happen. I won't press charges or seek legal action against the university. Relief flooded his face, but I wasn't finished. However, I want it on record that this affair happened. No sweeping it under the rug, no quiet reassignments. Actions have consequences, and it's time for Debbie and Lance to face theirs. Now, wait just a minute, Lance started, but Dr. Jameson silenced him with a look. Mr. Matland, surely we can come to a more discreet resolution, the president pleaded. So I shook my head. Discretion went out the window when my wife decided to cheat on me with her colleague. The university can handle this however you see fit, but know that if I catch even a whiff of a cover-up, I'll go public with everything I know. Dr. Jameson's shoulders sagged in defeat. Very well, Mr. Matland, we'll handle this matter internally but with full transparency. I nodded, satisfied. Then I turned to Debbie, really looking at her for the first time since this confrontation began. Her eyes were red-rimmed, mascara smudged. For a moment I remembered the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. But that woman was gone, replaced by a stranger who betrayed everything we'd built together. Goodbye, Debbie, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. The shock on her face was almost comical. Did she really think there was any coming back from this? Bill, please, she whispered, reaching out to grab my arm. We can work this out. Think about the kids. So I pulled away from her touch. I'm thinking about the kids. They deserve better than this. Better than us pretending everything's fine when it's not. It's over, Debbie. With that, I turned and walked away, ignoring the calls of my name behind me. The crowd parted, whispers following in my wake. I could feel their eyes on me, could almost hear the gossip starting already. Let them talk. I didn't care anymore. As I pushed through the doors and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vast emptiness where my heart used to be. It should have scared me, this lack of emotion. But in that moment it felt like a blessing. I got into my car and drove away, leaving behind the shattered remains of my marriage and the life I thought I knew. But where I was going, I wasn't sure. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. A few weeks later, I sat at my desk, mindlessly shuffling papers when my phone buzzed. Debbie's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it load to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello, Debbie. Her voice came through, subdued and hollow. Bill, I'm filing for divorce. So I'd been expecting this, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the gut. A week had passed since the university incident, and in that time, I'd retreated further into my work, building walls around my emotions. I see, I replied, my voice steady and detached. Thank you for letting me know. There was a pause on her end, as if she was waiting for me to say more, but I had nothing left to give, so the silence stretched between us, a chasm too wide to bridge. Bill, Debbie started, then stopped. I could hear the weariness in her voice as resignation. I guess that's it then. I guess so, I replied, my tone flat and emotionless. Another beat of silence. I could almost picture her, probably sitting at her kitchen table, phone clutched tightly in her hand. But the image didn't stir anything in me anymore. The Debbie I'd loved was gone, replaced by this stranger who'd betrayed everything we'd built together. Goodbye, Bill, she finally said. Goodbye, Debbie. I hung up without ceremony, staring at the phone for a moment before setting it down. The finality of it all washed over me, but instead of pain I felt nothing. The coldness that had been growing inside me since I'd discovered her affair became a permanent fixture, numbing me to any lingering attachment. I turned back to my work, ready to lose myself in the familiarity of legal briefs and case files. It was over, and I was ready to move on with my life. Without her. I hung up the phone, Debbie's words still ringing in my ears. I'm filing for divorce. The finality of it hit me, but not in the way I expected. There was no gut-wrenching pain, no desperate urge to call her back and beg her to reconsider. Instead, I felt nothing. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the case files spread out before me. The office buzzed with activity outside my door, but it felt distant, muffled. I should have been devastated. This was the end of my marriage, the official severing of a bond that had once meant everything to me. But the overwhelming emotion I'd anticipated just wasn't there. My eyes burned slightly, and I realized a few tears had escaped. I wiped them away quickly, almost annoyed at this involuntary reaction. These weren't tears of heartbreak or despair. They felt more like muscle memory, a habitual response to what should have been a deeply painful moment. So I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long breath. The hollow feeling in my chest expanded, filling the space where grief should have resided. It was then that I understood this coldness, this emotional detachment I'd cultivated over the past weeks, had become a part of me. But it wasn't just a shield anymore, it was who I was now. Standing up, I walked to the window of my office, looking out at the city below. People scurried about their day, oblivious to the fact that my world had just irrevocably changed. Or had it? The truth was, my marriage had been over long before this phone call. This was just the final nail in the coffin. I touched my face, feeling the lingering moisture from those few errant tears. As I wiped them away, I knew with absolute certainty that these would be the last tears I'd ever shed for Debbie. Our story was over, and I was ready to close the book. Turning back to my desk, I felt a strange sense of lightness. The weight of uncertainty, of clinging to something that no longer existed, had lifted. My marriage was officially over, and while there was a dull ache beneath the surface, it was overshadowed by a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I sat down and pulled the nearest case file towards me, throwing myself back into work with renewed focus. The coldness that had once been my defense against Debbie's betrayal now fueled my determination. I was Bill Matland, Senior Assistant U.S. Attorney, and I had a job to do. As I delved into the details of my current case, I felt my mind sharpening, the fog of personal turmoil clearing. The past few months had been a roller coaster of emotions, but now, in the wake of Debbie's call, I felt strangely calm. The pain was there, lurking beneath the surface, but it no longer controlled me. I worked through the afternoon, barely noticing as the light outside my window faded from the bright glare of midday to the soft glow of evening. My colleagues came and went, some shooting concerned glances my way, but I barely registered their presence. I was in the zone, more focused and driven than I'd been in months. It wasn't until my stomach growled loudly that I realized how much time had passed. I leaned back, stretching my stiff muscles, and looked at the clock. It was past 8. I'd worked straight through dinner without even noticing. As I gathered my things to head home, I paused. Home. The word didn't mean what it used to. I wasn't going back to a shared space, to a family waiting for me. I was going to an empty apartment, a temporary place I'd rented when I first moved out. Strangely, the thought didn't fill me with dread or loneliness. Instead, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in a long time, possibility. For my life was my own now, unburdened by the weight of a failing marriage. The future stretched out before me, unknown but full of potential. So I walked out of the office, nodding goodbye to the few colleagues still burning the midnight oil. For the night air was cool on my face as I stepped outside, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of nearby restaurants and the faint hum of city life. As I walked to my car, I realized that this was the first step of my new life. The past was behind me, and though my heart had been hardened by recent events, I knew there was no turning back. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.